Всем привет, это 284 выпуск подкаста «Откровенно, про карьеризм». Мы с Олей выпусков 12 потеряли на моем винте, полгода работы.
Мы потеряли.
Это ж наш общий фраг,
да,
значит,
да.
Ущерб для обоих. Вот, где-то давно мы не выходили, давно хотели попробовать перейти таки видео, вот решили совместить аудио и видео. У нас там сейчас немножко сайт переехал, то есть вот читайте внимательно
описание. Много изменений.
Да, читайте внимательное описание к подкасту, то есть наши теперь аудиовыпуски будут доступны на отдельном ресурсе, не только на PodFM, на IT подкаст они будут хоститься, в Telegram-канале, вот все, в общем, будет в описании.
Теперь мы будем везде.
Да. Вот. Мы сейчас находимся в Ratio Software Engineering, будем общаться с SEO этой компании, я его фамилию в принципе не могу произнести.
Мы сейчас попросим гостя произнести ее.
За 3 или 4 года у меня английский немножко прокачался, а Оли нет, поэтому я буду пытаться Олины вопросы переводить Jerome. Мы решили в этот раз не привлекать отдельного.
Мы будем общаться на Мишином английском.
На Мишином английском, да. Hello, Jerome, could you present you to our listeners?
Sure. So, hi there. Yeah, I'm Jerome MacGillivray. I'm the CEO of Ratio Software Engineering. I'm originally from the UK, from London, but I'm currently living here in wonderful Kharkiv.
And how many years you have lived in Kharkiv?
So it's just about 4 years now, yeah.
4 years already?
Yeah, 4.
Okay. And how many cities you have lived like so long periods, years? London, Kharkiv and...
So I lived in a few places around the UK. So I grew up in London until I was a kind of teenager, then moved. I went to university and moved to north of England to a place called Doncaster, which is north of England. And then I lived down in Cornwall in sort of south-west England for probably 4 or 5 years. So actually Kharkiv is, it's been home for quite a long time, yeah.
Cool. What do you like in Kharkiv that you have stopped here for so long period?
I think it's true to say the people are pretty wonderful. So it's a really nice city to live in. It's very comfortable. Got lots of nice bars and coffee shops. I've kind of made a bit of a home here, I guess. Because I'm living here with my wife and our 2 children. So our twins. Go to school here, or will they be starting school this year here?
You're not sure about it.
What?
Are they already in school or will start
Well,
school?
they've been in Detski Sadik for a couple of years, and then they should be starting like proper school this year, this September. Mm-hmm. So it's been home for a while. It's kind of a nice place to live, good place to work in.
Okay, you're here 4 years. What about Russian or Ukrainian? Have you started this long plan?
Oh dear. So my Russian is terrible, which is really bad since my wife is Russian speaker and my children speak Russian. Ukrainian, I'm afraid I know about 2 words of Ukrainian.
What's this words?
And those words I can't even remember. So, it's terrible. My excuse is, one, I'm British, and British people are famous for being very bad at learning other people's languages. The second excuse is that actually I found when I came here, I thought I would find learning Russian really easily because I thought everybody would speak Russian to me, and of course they don't. Everybody wants to practice their English with me.
I could speak with you on Russian. It's easy.
Maybe we could start doing 1 day a week in the office in Russian. So my third excuse is that I'm just naturally lazy. And my fourth excuse is I guess I'm a little bit older now, and learning new languages is kind of harder when you start to get a bit older. It's real. It's children learn languages very quickly. And, as you get a bit older, it becomes harder,
Okay, you say that your wife is Russian, is from Kharkiv?
No, so my wife is actually from St. Petersburg.
And how you have met that?
Где тут Харьков?
Where is here Kharkiv?
So my excuse might be that actually my Didushka is from Ukraine originally. So my wife's father's family originally from Ukraine. He was my great-grandfather, my wife's great-grandfather was a tankist in the Second World War, in the Ukrainian divisions of the Soviet army. But actually I met my wife in London, so we didn't meet anywhere more exotic than actually on a metro station in London, and it all started from there. So my children were born in the UK, so they're dual nationals, Russian, British, but yeah. Okay. So I have no connections to Kharkiv before coming here.
Okay, then we'll return later to Kharkiv.
Можно я еще немножко в этой теме поспрашиваю? А как вот после лондонской организованности, мегапорядка, вот Харьков, на мой взгляд, очень сильно отличается. Это все-таки, наверное, хаос. Как это воспринимается?
Оль, ты помнишь, что мне это еще переводить?
But if I understood that right, that's one of the nice things about Kharkiv. So London is a huge city. And actually, to some extent, I came to Kharkiv because I was employed by a IT company originally, an international IT company who asked me to come to Kharkiv and work in the office here, managing their clients and stuff. So, being the European representative with Western clients for this outsourcing company. The reason I took that job in the first place, partly because we wanted to bring our children somewhere that was Russian speaking. So our children were growing up in London. We had lots of friends who were Ukrainian or Russians who had children in London, and their children were struggling to keep their language alive because English is such an easy language. I shouldn't say this, should I? It's a relatively easy language to speak and learn and be understood in. These children go to school, all their friends speak in English. And we saw our friends struggling to get their children to still carry on speaking Russian at home. So, and we wanted to try and, my wife is a kind of linguist. She teaches English here, but she's kind of got a linguist background. So we wanted to come to somewhere for a while where our kids would keep that Russian language going and kind of, preserve that. So I was looking originally for jobs. I have worked before in Eastern Europe. So I've worked in Belarus before. I worked in Minsk. I've worked in St. Petersburg before. So I was looking for work in this part of the world, some Russian-speaking part of the world. And this job opportunity came up. The other thing was that living in London is not like, going on holiday in London is one thing. Living there is another story. I worked in the city of London, which is the kind of the business centre of London, which is actually slightly in the east of London. And we lived right in the west of London. And it used to take me about 2 hours to get to work every day and 2 hours back. So I used to get half of my working day was spent travelling. Train fares are incredibly expensive. So it's something like, nearly spending nearly £1,000 every, few months on travel. And I got to the point I was sick of, we call it the commute. And my commute was I would get up in the morning, especially in the winter, it's dark outside. I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to work for 8. And I would leave the office maybe 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, and I would get home at 8, 9 in the evening. So I would actually leave my house in the dark and come home to my house in the dark. And it's like, we have a house with a garden. I never saw my garden except at weekends. It's like it was dark outside.
Харьковчане, цените жизнь в Харькове.
Yeah. So, it's great. Kharkiv is much, I like less big places. And Kharkiv's still a big city. Come on, it's 1.5 million people. It's not a village. It's, a big city, but it's almost everywhere you can
not
get
so
to by
big.
walking. I can walk to the office in half an hour. There's no way anywhere in the UK you could do that.
Okay, we have one classical first question. It's по-русски, это про во'IT'и. But in English, it's more like when and how you have come to IT. Why you have started work with IT.
So I've been working in IT for probably 25 years or more now. So kind of man and boy. I started working in IT when I was in the army. So when I left college in the UK, I joined the army. I was in the British Army.
Is it your choice or you must
No, it's choice. So British Army doesn't have conscription. So conscription is when you must go for some period. When you're 18, you have to go for 1 year or something. The UK, Great Britain doesn't have that. It stopped in the 1960s or something. So the army is fully professional for a good reason, because modern armies are high tech. It's not really effective to have people who work for a year in the army. You need people who are committed to long term. So I joined the army. I voluntarily went and joined the army and had a salary. It's a job. It's a well-paid job at the time. So in the 1980s, middle of the 1980s. And I worked in a specialist unit that used technology, used drones and some kind of clever technology.
Used drones?
It's 1980, mid-80s.
80?
So, yeah, drone technology has massively improved and the technology's got better. But actually drones were around in the 1940s. In the World War II, people were operating very simple pilotless aircraft with cameras on them. That's all it is. A drone is just a pilot. So we were operating drones in the 1980s. They were very basic. They were not digital cameras. The cameras were film cameras. The drone flew a program path, landed, and you extracted the film from the cameras and kind of produced the film. The films were very long strips, almost the whole route of the drone. But the drones had twin cameras, so they produced effectively 3D photographs.
In World War II?
No, this is like in the 1980s.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, but the effect would have been the same in World War II. They would have fitted pilotless aircraft with a couple of cameras. They would have been very crude. They probably could only fly in a straight line. But you can, effectively autopilots on aircraft, civilian aircraft, autopilots were in place on commercial aircraft in the 1950s, I think. So, and that's all an autopilot, isn't it? It's programmed pilot that flies a plane in a certain route, pre-programmed. It's fairly basic technology. What's more advanced now is not even, I was going to say wireless. Wireless was invented in the 1940s. So, Wi-Fi has been around since the 1940s. It's refined, it's improved, but the technology is very old, invented by a Hollywood actress. Wi-Fi was effectively, but so I got introduced with technology then, and when I left the army, I ended up working for some government organisations doing GIS, so Geographical Information Systems, so digital mapping. And I was involved in projects that were a bit like Google Street View, long before Google existed. Well, at least Google Street View existed. So we were doing kind of 3D mapping of roads and stuff in London. So I worked in government for quite a while in IT, and then kind of worked as a consultant, and that's how I started working in overseas. So I worked in Saudi Arabia for a short while. I worked in India, like with outsourcing, managing some outsourcing in India. I worked in Belarus, St. Petersburg, US. I worked in California for a bit on a project in Los Angeles. And then obviously now ended up in Ukraine. So I'm kind of, I didn't travel back then with my family. Some of it was obviously before I had a family. But this is the first time I've really traveled somewhere and stayed working in, offshore, as it were, for any long period. But yeah.
Is your education help you to work like in IT, some specialization or not?
You will never, in a million years, I think, guess what my university degree is in. But
Indian religion.
Yeah, all right, okay. Yeah, you know that already. Okay, so only because in Hinduism there are something like 3 million gods. So when something goes wrong in IT, like it always does, I have a widest choice of possible gods to pray to to make it better. No, so my university degree is, in English we would call it left of field. Something completely different. But I've been like all IT guys do. What do? We work and we study all the time. We're always studying new technologies, So my background in programming is fairly limited because I was a programmer. I was a .NET, kind of ASP, classic ASP.NET, programmer, SQL Server, even to show how old I am, VB6. Visual Basic 6. That's really old stuff.
I remember it.
Yeah, probably historically, a bit like the Jedi Knights. It's something forgotten in history. Were they even real? So my background in programming was quite short because I kind of very quickly, just happened to be the project I was working on. I very quickly became like team leader for the project. I became the kind of architect. So I guess I had those skills. So I was doing the database architecture work. So I stopped having to do the programming, left it to the guys who were actually good at programming to do the programming rather than leaving it to me. Sorry. So I studied back then. I studied, ASP.NET and SQL Server and did some courses in SQL Server back in the day. But then after that, I did kind of project management courses. So, I'm kind of Prince 2 certified. So this is a kind of structured project management methodology that's typically used in government, military, aircraft industry, and Prince 2 is a kind of project management method, particularly when you want to control a project that's very complex. For example, building a jet fighter. So when I studied Prince 2, the course I did, the other guys on the course with me all came from the Eurofighter project. So they were all working on the Eurofighter project. And Prince is a kind of way to apply to those kind of complex projects where you can't possibly have anything go wrong. You can't do a project like that agile because, you will start off designing a Eurofighter super jet and you'll end up with an origami bird. It's like you can't work like that. So I'm a agile fan and I've studied agile, but for very controlled environments, you need sort of more standard, more fixed, rigid methodology. So I did Prince, I did ITIL. So this ITIL is a kind of methodology for managing continuous infrastructure environments, so continuous support infrastructure environments. So it's things like understanding how to manage incidents, problems, tickets. So, help desk type scenarios. So sort of Jira Service Desk has this ITIL kind of configuration. So from, again, managing controlled environments, IT systems in a bank or something where, you can't just upgrade the servers when you feel like it. You have to plan it, you have to test them, you have to configure them, you have to make sure that, upgrading the operating system isn't going to cause bugs or, that kind of stuff. So I studied those kind of things. And then, I've done minor courses in between on Unix and stuff, things that I don't even remember anymore. So like typical IT person, you always learning something new, always kind of trying to improve your skill set, always trying to keep up with the latest technology that somebody's come out with,
Do you like this in IT? That you every time need to learn something new? Yeah,
because I also think that, most people who work in IT is not just a job, it's a sort of hobby, I suppose. It's like it becomes I think you do get people who go into IT for the money, or I was going to say for the glory. Is there any? But they go in for the money or something. But generally, people who go into IT have a kind of mindset that appeals to them to do this, so they have
for glory and money. It's like soldiers of fortune.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I try to remember how it's.
If I wanted glory and money, I would have become a mercenary. Yeah.
Mercenary.
Yeah. But no.
Оля, это наемники.
Спасибо.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yes, but it's really because like in a lot of like professions, like for medicine, when you are more older, you have more experience and it's more cost money because you are more value person because you knew more. But in IT, when it's every time is changed, so like your background in VB6, it's not be useful already, probably in some very, very corner cases.
Yeah.
But like doctor with like the same age with you, the same experience, his experience that he had 20 years ago, I don't know, for some on hard fixing or something like this, it's still important and still valuable and add value to him.
Yeah, it's true, and it's actually a problem with IT, and it's a universal problem. So it's a problem in the UK, for example. So IT guys over the age of 50 in the UK have a hard time getting jobs. I mean, it's really true. Everybody, you read about it all the time. Recruitment agencies in the UK are often accused of ageism. That basically if they see the CV, they see the date of birth of the person, they reject them straight away if they're over 50. Whether that's really true, no, I don't know. But yeah, it's much harder to get a job as a programmer or a support person if you're in that kind of age bracket. That's not always the case. And there are certainly VB6 is pretty much dead. But there are systems around, particularly again in things like banking and stuff like that. Banking, education, science. There are lots of older technologies around because there's no incentive to move. Those technologies are very well established, or the cost of change is massive. So with banks, typically, banks don't change their IT systems very often because their IT systems are worth billions of dollars. Replacing them is incredibly costly. And is it worth doing it if your old mainframe still works? And of course, what happens is you have an old mainframe. The people who know how to support some old IBM mainframe system are becoming less and less as years go on. And so in that case, I have friends in the UK who are in the same age bracket as me, who have very good jobs, very well-paid jobs, because they're one of the few people that still know how to operate some old IBM system or, some old SQL server database, platform or something. So it's not always the case that the latest technology wins, but it is true that the IT people have to keep up. But it's true of all professions. If you're a lawyer, you can't rely on having studied law 10 years ago to know what's the latest law. Law is continually evolving in every country. Medicine the same, so doctors have to study all the time, have to publish papers, research.
But it's more usually than your old knowledge is still reliable. Like the same in lawyer, because lawyer who knows some laws from 10 years old, it usually still works, or some adopt. But he still need to educate. I agree with you totally, but it's more reusable old educated.
But then I guess the normal progression for IT people is this is one thing that's a little bit different in Ukraine. So in UK, there's a kind of, if there's a progression path in IT, if you can call it that. But people usually start as programmers. They work their way up as a programmer to a certain point. And they tend to branch at that point into sort of, if you like, three ways. One is into management, and they'll become, CTO, CEO maybe of some IT company. Although you find, and it's a problem with the IT industry, that actually a lot of senior managers in IT have no IT background at all. They tend to come from a marketing background or a sales background, and they become CEO, CTO of a company without really any technical knowledge. It's because they know how to sell stuff, or they know how to market stuff, or they know how to, get products to market. So, but IT guys will end up in the West typically. They will end up becoming project managers. So it's very different in Ukraine. My experience of Ukraine is that people start at the bottom like that. I'm a programmer or I'm a project manager. So for example, project managers in Ukraine tend to get paid the same or less than programmers. That's really unusual model, because if you went to the UK, project managers are senior guys. They've got experience. They're usually guys that have already got 10 years programming experience before they could even become a project manager. Otherwise, people wouldn't touch them. And those project managers are then senior people managing multi-million-pound projects, and they get paid accordingly. So senior project managers, program managers get paid high salaries because of their experience. It doesn't matter that their IT background was in VB6 or .NET. What they've got is years of experience of knowing how to run a team, how to do things smoothly, how to interface between the programmers and the customer, sometimes the customer is internal. The customer is the CEO of the company who knows nothing about IT, and he wants some new system, and the project manager often sits in between the two and has to explain why it's not a good idea or it is a good idea. The kind of Dilbert type characters. If you ever read the Dilbert cartoons, classic. That's why those cartoons, because it's real. Then you really get CEOs who know nothing about technology who sort of say, let's do blockchain. Why? Because I went to some conference and somebody told me blockchain is the answer to everything. Okay. and the project manager has to explain to the CEO why maybe actually just because you went to a conference and somebody was talking about it, it may be not what we want. Anyway, so guys either do that, and another route they go through is architect. So, there's almost a branch. I'm a programmer for 10 years, then I become a project manager, or I become an architect. And if I become an architect, then maybe I become the CTO, Chief Technology Officer for a company. And that's like my route to the top. So although you do meet sometimes programmers who've been programming for 20 years because they love it and they're good at it, or they found a niche job doing it for some bank or something, you tend to find that in Western Europe, the US, people stop becoming a programmer maybe after 10, 15 years, and they go on to the next step. And so you don't have necessarily that problem where you have older programmers who can't find jobs, if you like, or struggle, because those guys are already doing something else. They're already running their own IT company, or they are, big project manager on big projects, or they are CTO of a company, or, chief architect,
Okay. Cool. So let's return to Kharkiv. And all with this background, with Russian wife, why you go to Kharkiv?
So as I say, I first came here because I was invited to come here. So I worked for an IT company who has an office. They have offices all around Ukraine, Belarus.
You could name this company.
Siklim. So, I came to...
They don't pay for us, but you could use it.
Okay, yeah. So I worked for Siklim, Danish company, outsourcing company, big company, and they asked me to come here. I think originally they kind of offered me one of two cities. They offered me, would I like to move to Kiev, or would I like to move to Kharkiv? I came to Kharkiv, met the guys from Siklim in Kharkiv, met a wonderful bunch of people, really, really nice people, very friendly, very helpful. And I guess we just, me and my wife, got to like the place very quickly. So I stayed here, worked for Siklim for, I guess, a couple of years. Here. First 2 years, I think I was here. I was working for Siklim, and it was great. Good, it's a good company. But for a number of reasons, one, I'm quite ambitious. Maybe you could argue I don't play well with others. I don't know. I'm a nice guy, but I'm ambitious. And maybe I got a bit frustrated at Siklim. The big organization, things don't move very fast. I didn't see any real progression. I was kind of hoping that I would come to Siklim and I would, end up in a more senior management position, and it didn't really happen. And I also kind of realized that actually that Ukraine is a land of opportunity for starting a business here, in IT, in a way that you just couldn't do it in the UK. So I kind of thought, well, I can, if Siklim can do it, I can do it.
So you have started your first companies in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's your first experience of
no. So I've owned, run several companies before in the UK. So both IT and non-IT companies over the years. So this is my first time kind of running a business, but it's although we're still relatively small right now, this is probably my first experience of running something that's going to grow into a big business.
Я вот что хотела уточнить. А есть ли какие-то особенности, проблемы, может быть, при ведении бизнеса именно в Украине? Может, вот ты заметил какие-то нюансы?
Have you some issues or problems for work business in Ukraine? Like probably some specific, probably some bribes.
So far, no, in that sense. So ease of doing business in Ukraine is pretty good. There are some nuances. So just some really basic ones. So for example, the lack of real estate is a challenge in Ukraine. Funnily enough, although renting an office is cheap, actually finding an office is quite hard. Surprisingly, compared to, for example, London. Maybe that's the size of Kharkiv, but actually it's the same in Kiev. From as I know from friends, colleagues,
Could you accept this? Because Ola last year worked from in Kyiv. Тяжело найти офис в Киеве, так же, как в Харькове? Или...
В Харькове сильно тяжелее.
Oh, she says that in Kharkiv it's more hard to find office than in Kyiv.
Okay, maybe, yeah. But certainly, I mean, in London, particularly the last few years, the rate of construction has been so high that if you wanted to rent an office in London, you're falling over them. They're everywhere. There are always offices available. I've been involved in office moves before, many times in London. And, if you want an office of a certain size in a certain area, you will find, 5, 10, 15 places available. So that's a logistical challenge here. In Kharkiv, we're growing. We need, right now we need a new office for Ratio. And what's on the market? 1 or 2 places that are not really ideal, but they're kind of okay if we have to do it. The rental market here for office space is much more limited than it would be in the UK in general. I'm sure there are places in the UK you go to where hotspots where it's impossible to find an office, but generally speaking, that's pretty good. Other nuances. Not really. I mean, the advantage of Ukraine is price. So, rental price per square meter is much lower, much lower than London or even anywhere in the southeast, southwest of England. Salaries are lower. So, and that doesn't mean you're exploiting people. It just means that you can hire people that you couldn't afford to do in the UK. If you wanted to hire an office admin person, in a UK office, that's a luxury because it's expensive. You have to pay a big salary, you have to pay, a lot of taxes on that. It's whereas here you can make those decisions much better, much quicker. So, do we need somebody, new person in the office? We need a resource to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, we do. Right, let's just go hire somebody. You can make business decisions much quicker here. And that's very refreshing. And it makes you much more mobile as a business. You can react to client need, to your own needs much quicker than you can in the UK. I mean, that's why companies come to places like Ukraine to outsource.
And what is specialization of your company currently in Ukraine? And probably you have some product or just outsource.
So there's kind of 2 arms to the business. So there's the outsourcing; it pays the bills. The outsourcing side. So we've got some Swiss clients. Particularly, we are sort of growing some Japanese clients now, so we're very interested in the Japanese market. So outsourcing wise, we're kind of technology agnostic, I guess. So although it seems to me that what's happening organically is that we're beginning to grow an expertise in like Hybris and SAP products. Maybe that's because it looks like a lot of our pipeline is coming from the Swiss and German market, and SAP is a major product there. So Hybris, SAP, PHP, some .NET. We are involved in some mobile projects, but we don't really have mobile developers right now, so iOS and Android. But I'd be interested in expanding that area. And then kind of Python and those kind of products, but that's more because of the R&D side. So that's the kind of outsourcing stuff. We'll more or less do anything if we can find the resources in Ukraine or in Kharkiv to do it. And then the other side of the business is this sort of R&D side where we're doing, work with robotics, with AI, and with blockchain. So,
like on the trend.
Yeah.
Оля, do you want to ask some questions more?
Про дальнейшие планы.
Еще что-то, может, хочешь спросить?
Не, наверное, нет, ничего не придумала.
Okay. Ola a little bit shy to speak in Russian with English.
Yeah. We can say in Russian and maybe I can understand.
What's next plans to you, Jerome?
Personally or business?
Personally, business, child.
So personally, some of that is centered around the kids. So the kids are going to school. They start school in September at Nur. So Нуре, whatever.
Национальная это Украины, как-то так.
Noa. Yeah. So they start school, so, they need to get into school. Getting to the rhythm of school. So we're certainly going to be around here, staying in Ukraine for like the next year or so. Then from a business point of view, grow the business. I'm ambitious, so I want to grow a big company here. Potentially we will look to open other offices. So, main office now is Kharkiv. I'm quite interested to open an office inside Europe, so probably Estonia. I am sort of certain that we'll at some point have to open an office in Kiev, simply because it's Kiev and there's a lot more resources there, technical resources. So, grow a company, get it to, by the end of this year, try and get it to, 50, 80 people. And then by the end of the following year, 200, and keep going from there. I don't have a reason to stop. And I'm not sort of, it would be great to have a business that has a couple of thousand people, as long as we can keep the same atmosphere going and keep everything happy and,
So, Jerome, what is next? Let's continue. I'm not sure from some way after grow company for 200 people.
Yeah. So, like I said, we will, I'm sure, with the boys in school, we want them to stick around, get settled into school, grow the business. What next? Keep growing the business, get to a point at which I can retire and buy a yacht or something. I don't know, So, I want to grow the business. I want to grow the client base, particularly in Japan. I want the outsourcing business to help to feed the rest of the business. I think at some point we will be looking for some major investment in R&D work. My personal passion and kind of my the way I see technology industry, the point progression I'm very interested in is robotics, because I see that as really the next stage of development in IT. IT is always developing, building programs, making applications, the internet, whatever. But robotics is a kind of game changer. Robots have been around for a long time, obviously. Again, since the 1940s and 50s, robots have been around. But we're moving into a world where robots are going to get smarter. People talk about AI. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. Unless the robots are being very quiet about it, there is no such thing as artificial intelligence. Humans have not at the moment built a thinking, feeling machine. But at the pace that IT accelerates, I think we will get there at some point. So we will reach this singularity, they call it, where we have self-aware robots. It's a very interesting theoretical and almost philosophical thing to consider, the concept of what do you do when you have machines that become self-aware, and how do you define self-awareness? The Turing test is not proof of self-awareness. That's just proof that a robot can fool a human into believing it's real. There's not much effort involved in that. That's smart programming, and chatbots can do that. They can get away with convincing the person who's listening in a chat that that's a human they're talking to, not a robot. That's not that clever. But a real robot that kind of gets that point of singularity, that's going to be a very difficult world to deal with, because there are things that define human intelligence, and one, for example, is the ability to deceive. So our ability to lie is actually part of the definition of what makes us intelligent. What the hell do we do when we get to robots that are self-aware enough that they can deceive? So powerful, strong machines that can tell a lie. That's a really difficult world to live in. Isaac Asimov's rules of robots shouldn't ever harm a human. Well, all right. Well, if a robot is that clever, it can say, "Of course, I wouldn't harm you," and not necessarily mean it. So that's a really interesting world, and robotics is a very fascinating place because it's a meld of engineering. It's about so it goes all the way from how do we improve power. At the moment, if we built a super self-aware robot and it walked down the road, after 10 minutes it would run out of battery power anyway and go, so we don't have to be very scared of Terminator right now, because the Terminator would get about 100 yards before he ran out of battery. And then he'd just be a giant toaster. So, battery power, then it's engineering about improving the performance and reliability of actuators. So, the control units and things that make robots move. Then it's about improving the engineering design of things like robotic hands, robotic arms. There are some very primitive humanoid type robots around. We have one, we have this Now, SoftBank Now robot. It's great fun, but it's still pretty crude from an engineering. It's beautifully engineered, but it's still pretty crude compared to a human's engineering. We've evolved, the way we are, and our body's engineering is beautiful, efficient, flexible. We're actually incredibly strong compared to our size and weight. We can lift incredibly heavy objects compared to our size and weight, and we can do it very efficiently with very minimal fuel. We need food, we don't need much food to keep us going. So it's really interesting to look at robotics engineering and explore that. I guess in a sense I come from an engineering background. My father was a research scientist at Imperial College in London, engineering research scientist. So that interests me a lot. Then there's the software element, if you like, the AI. How do robots learn? How do we get away from our current learning process where we try and teach robots by pumping inputs in and hoping that there'll be outputs? And actually, do we need to change the way we teach robots and actually teach them more like we teach small children? As somebody who's had, grown up with small children, looking at the way they learn stuff is very different from the way that we are programmatically trying to teach robots now. Humans don't learn like that. We don't learn by being programmed and then being doing things and then making mistakes and then correcting mistakes. Humans learn in a very organic way, and we may have to teach robots in the same way. So there's a whole interesting spectrum of stuff there around robotics. Yes, there are things like tackling the uncanny valley. So if you're building humanoid robots, you have there's this concept, the uncanny valley, where the more a robot looks like a human, the more humans are uncomfortable with it. So, if you start with a robot, so Ex Machina, the robot in that, actually it's almost uncomfortable because it's a robot, but it looks almost like a human. And that's a really weird place to be in. There's Sophia or whatever, that robot kind of mannequin thing that I think was it Dubai or something have offered citizenship to, or something mad. Anyway. And the robot is very clever mechanically, but you look at it and it's pretty freaky. That is not something you'd be comfortable in your house with. So it's a really interesting. That's really where I'd like to get into. We're already working with some Japanese companies now to talk about robotics, telexistence, this kind of remote control of robotics. I'm in the UK in a couple of weeks' time. I'm meeting up with the Shadow Robot Company, who are just like the gods of like kind of engineering hands. So they produce this Shadow Robot hand, which is the most advanced robotic hand in the world. It can pick up a raw egg and stuff like that. It's really super sensitive and super smart. With
like in Deadpool.
Yeah, like Deadpool.
The first time, if you remember the
small.
Yeah. Okay. Like I'll finish two questions. It's, could you recommend two books for our listeners?
Just random books
that you like. In any sense, probably it's about childhood or about IT, about some.
Okay. So funny books. So I like funny books. I have an awful lot of kind of comic books. My favorite of all, because it's my first name, of course, is Jerome K. Jerome as an author. So 3 Men in a Boat or 3 Men on a Bummel. There's 2 books. So I've cheated. But Three Men in a Boat. I mean, if you haven't read it, read it. It's so funny. Maybe you have to be English. Maybe it's English humour, but I don't think so. I think it's universal. It's very funny, and it's really interesting to read a book that was written in 1889, and the things he says about 1889 are completely relevant today. So just because of technology and advancements, the world has not actually changed that much in many ways. There's a lot of things in there that are concepts that are true today, funny concepts. So Jerome, Three Men in a Boat. And then the other thing, I'm a big fan of science fiction. There is a writer, not particularly well-known writer, although she's won a few awards, including the Hugo Award, a couple of times, I think. So there's a writer called C.J. Chera. She's an American author. And I've been a fan of her books probably since I first found one in an old second-hand bookshop. I went to, see them so much in Ukraine, but in the UK, there's a lot of these second-hand bookshops on High Street. There'll be a bookshop selling old books that are already been read, old pre-read books. Pre-loved books. And I found, maybe when I was 18, I found a copy of one of her books and loved it. There is a series of books. She's written science fiction and fantasy books. There's one, and it's for the Ukrainian audience. There's one series of books that are set in kind of medieval Kiev and Russia. So, Kiev and Rus, so Ukraine. And the first book is called Rusalka, and it's really good. I don't think you'd find it in Russian or Ukrainian.
Okay,
but you could read it in English. It's brilliant. It's a sort of fantasy story about this, drowned girl who's a kind of ghost and magicians and stuff like that.
Okay, so for last, say something good for our listeners.
Oh hell.
Oh hell, okay.
Yeah. What can I say? Thank you very much for listening to me. It's great to talk to people and meet people and kind of talk about myself. It's Ukraine is a wonderful place. I think it's a really wonderful place full of really cool people. Don't ever despair of what you can achieve. Here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jerome, that come and answer to our questions. Спасибо слушателям, что слушали нас. Подписывайтесь на нас теперь в Ютубе, в Телеграме, в iTunes. Все ссылочки будут у нас вот где-то там в описании. Всем спасибо, всем пока.